Welcome everyone to another episode of Data AI Stockholm Community Story Series. Today we'll be digging into a topic that is very interesting and it's becoming more and more important for the data and AI. And it is sandboxes for coding agents. And I'm very excited to welcome Rebecka Storm, who is the member of technical staff at Modal and also the co-founder of Women in Data Science. Welcome, Rebecka. So nice to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. I have to say that I am a big fan of yours. I have been following you for some time now, and your career is such an inspiration to me. And I have to say, I don't know if I can't say that, but I mean, you have been like kind of a role model to me. Really, and I'm really happy that I'm talking to you today, and so happy that you said yes to this.
It's so nice of you to say.
Thank you. And I mean, I will before we start and digging into the topic, I wanted to ask you more about your background and let the audience know who are you, more about your journey, and what led you to work with Modal.
Yeah, of course. It's a little bit of a long story, but I'll start from the beginning. So I originally studied physics and thought I wanted to work in a research lab or doing experimental physics. So I did that at a tiny little X-ray startup in California for a year. But I kind of quickly realized that I was much more interested in working with data. I really enjoyed writing code. I found that a lot more interesting than walking around with like a screwdriver and like running experiments. So I learned Python and sort of decided that I wanted to do data science because that was like very hot and seemed exciting. And I felt like I'm good at math, so I should be able to do this. So I started out my work in data science at iSettle. I was there for almost 6 years, working as a data scientist and became ML engineer. The job titles changed, and ended up leading the machine learning team there towards the end. So for the last 2 years, I think. And we did basically all things applied machine learning at iSettle. So that was a lot of risk stuff. I worked on fraud detection, credit scoring, but also things like lead optimization for sales. We did like marketing optimization, basically worked very broadly on applied ML. Then I moved on to Tink, where I joined as head of data. So I had a broader role there. I was sort of fully in a manager role, covering analytics and data engineering. But I was only there for about 6 months because what happened after that was one of my former colleagues from iSettle came and said he was starting a startup and basically convinced me to join. Which was not an easy decision, but I'm very happy I did that. So this is a little more than 3 years ago. And we started Twirl, which was an data orchestration startup. I can go into much more detail on that. But basically, we ran Twirl for almost 3 years. We scaled up to 8 people and a bunch of customers. And then in May last year, we got acquired by Modal. So that's how I ended up here.
Fantastic. Amazing. Really great journey. But for the audience that don't really know about Modal, can you just please tell us a few words of what Modal is and what kind of problems do you solve?
Yeah, of course. So Modal, the main sort of business for Modal is nice and easy access to GPUs. So we basically make it super, super easy to deploy code that runs on GPUs in the cloud. And we make it very easy to scale up from just running on a single machine to hundreds or thousands of GPUs concurrently. So we basically solve a couple of problems. One is that it's oftentimes hard to access GPUs. GPUs are scarce, as I think will be familiar to a lot of people. A lot of customers come to us because they struggle to get the capacity they need from their cloud provider. And what we do is we basically aggregate capacity across all of the major clouds, a bunch of neo clouds, and always look for capacity where we can find it and where it's cheapest. So we make decisions every second on where to find that capacity. And then we do a lot of work to make this a nice developer experience. So making it super, super easy and smooth to deploy functions on the cloud. That's our main business. But then the other product that we build, and which is the one I work on, is Sandboxes, which is a separate product that's basically for running AI-generated code. So LLMs have become pretty good at generating code, as I think most people know. But it's not really enough to just generate the code. You need to also run it somewhere. And like what's made coding agents really take off recently is the fact that you can sort of run an agent in a loop, have it generate code, try it, run the code, see what happens, adjust errors, and kind of keep going until you have something that works. And sandboxes are basically a product for running that code. So it runs it in like an isolated way so that it basically doesn't mess up your own production environment.
Interesting. So let's go about more deep into the topic. So, I mean, we hear more and more about coding agents and autonomous systems that can edit, can write, can even test, but even deploy code. So, what's your perspective on, like, what is a coding agent for you, and why do you think it's so important today?
Yeah, I think the powerful thing is sort of what I mentioned. Like this happened, I think, sort of around last fall, that like the idea of running a coding agent in a loop rather than trying to kind of one shot generate a bunch of code and hope that it would work. This idea that instead you run a loop, that sort of started taking off. I would say it sort of happened with Claude Code. I don't know if they invented it, but I think they sort of popularized it, at least the idea of having this agent running in a loop. I think that was sort of a step change in productivity and made a lot of software engineers who were sort of previously skeptical of like AI coding realize like this actually works because it was so much better than before. But then I think there was another step change kind of recently, like around like the beginning of this year, where cloud agents took off. So basically, you're no longer running the agent on your laptop. You're no longer like, keeping your laptop alive and being super annoyed when the screensaver jumps in or your laptop kind of runs out of battery because you're no longer running on the laptop. You're doing at cursor agent from Slack and kind of just kicking it off on the job. And that really excites me because I think that's like a step change in what you can achieve. You can kick off all of these cloud agents. There's like no local setup. It makes it trivial for people who are not developers to like being productive. So I just think that's super cool.
Yeah, that's actually super cool indeed. I mean, thinking about how many people can now actually start building things without having any technical background. But when it comes to the main topic, that sandboxes for coding agents, can you tell us more about what does sandbox mean in this context, and why do coding agents need one?
Yeah. So a sandbox, it's basically, I think the name comes from kind of wanting to give an agent a playground, like a safe and isolated space where it can do whatever it wants, because that's the danger of running AI generated code is you really have no idea what it's doing. And like there are obviously lots of ways you can kind of try to hack these systems. You can try to get these agents to kind of do basically malicious stuff. And so the point of a sandbox is to isolate an agent and have it run in a completely isolated environment. It's usually ephemeral, so it's sort of temporary. It doesn't live forever. You give it an environment where it runs, it does some specific task, and then you kill the sandbox, and that's it. So isolation is kind of the key aspect of a sandbox. But what makes them interesting and like what sort of makes this an interesting product is the fact that you generally need to run them at really big scale. That's sort of what makes it fun and exciting. So usually you want to get many of those off all at once, or like maybe ad hoc, but you want many of them and you want the ability to spin them up really quickly. And that's basically what makes this product hard and fun to build.
Yeah, I can imagine. So I also actually wanted to do a follow-up question on this. So what does it take actually to run a coding agent so it can run like safely at scale? How can you do that? It must. I mean, I cannot imagine really. Can you please share more information on that?
Yeah, I mean it's tricky. So the main thing that we provide is basically this sandbox environment. We use sort of gvisor to make the sandbox completely isolated and kind of limit what the agent can do inside the sandbox. I should say there's actually two sort of main patterns here for how to run sandboxes with agents. We see both on Modal. So you can either run an agent inside a sandbox. So that's kind of the Claude Code approach, where you have the agent running in a sandbox or in an environment, and it's sort of making edits to its own environment and running and iterating. But there's also another pattern where you have the agent running somewhere else that's not in a sandbox, or maybe it's a different sandbox, but it's sort of interacting with a sandbox from outside. So the agent itself doesn't run in the sandbox. It kind of just makes modifications to the sandbox. So the sandbox is kind of like its laptop, where it runs the actual code that it produces. And they sort of have slightly different challenges. If you run the agent inside the sandbox, then usually you need to give it some credentials. Like usually you want your agent to somehow interact with the outside world. It's possible to think of a task where it could just be completely isolated, but most of the time you need to kind of open up the sandbox to the outside world in some way. You need your agent to be able to, Google stuff, for example. Whereas if you run the agent outside, it's easier because then you can really like limit the sandbox to just communicating with the agent, and you don't really need much else. But that's a big part of kind of the product and figuring out how to support both of these use cases in a secure way.
I guess it's the most challenging part. Or do you have anything else that you can share, like that you felt like is really challenging in building this infrastructure?
I think a big challenge or something that we spend a lot of time on is the scaling part. We're really sort of pushing the limits all the time as to how many sandboxes we can sort of, both how quickly we can spin them up and how many we can run concurrently. That's like a really fun engineering problem. And it's sort of one where we're pretty proud of sort of where we are at. We think we're sort of ahead of basically everyone else in the space. So that's really cool. Another thing we spend a lot of time on is basically the developer experience of this and making it really easy to start a new sandbox, both easy and fast, because that's typically something you also care about, like very, very quickly having an environment up and running. And the hard part there isn't so much like starting the sandbox itself, but it's like getting it ready. So you need to kind of have everything you need inside the sandbox. You need to sort of install stuff. You need to usually start some server inside the sandbox. You might need to pull some files, maybe do a Git pull if you're like working with a remote repository. There's like lots of steps that have to happen. So it's both about making those steps ergonomic, but also we have a bunch of features that basically help you speed this up. So you can kind of do all of that work and then you can take a snapshot of a sandbox and store that. So next time you can kind of start the sandbox from that snapshot and it's much faster. So there's a bunch of interesting like patterns around how to achieve this and essentially make sandboxes nice and easy to work with. And it's like a very immature product. So like us and a bunch of other companies in the space are sort of inventing this as we go, which is also fun.
Nice. Can you share maybe some real world examples of people actually using coding agents or sandbox for coding agents?
Yeah, of course. I guess the sort of most famous one of our customers is Lovable. So if you've ever used Lovable, you have used a sandbox. So like, I kind of assume most people are familiar with like the experience. So when you create your app on Lovable, you get like a preview that shows what your app looks like. That runs in a sandbox. So that's the kind of thing that you would need to run in an isolated way, because that code obviously isn't trusted by anyone, and Lovable doesn't want to run that inside their own infrastructure where it could, break things. Another example that sort of became big kind of recently is there's a US company called Ramp. They're a fintech company, but they basically built an internal coding agent, so like an internal version of Claude Code or Cursor Cloud Agents. And they built that on top of Modal sandboxes, and they wrote a blog post about it that kind of went viral. So I can recommend checking that one out if anyone's interested in understanding. They did a really nice write-up of like all the decisions they had to make and like what was hard and what was not hard about building their own coding agent like that.
Fantastic. That's actually pretty cool. We should try. And looking ahead, do you think that coding agents will become fully autonomous developers, or do you think they will remain co-pilots for humans?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't think I want to give a binary answer to this one. I don't know. I mean, I think it will be gradual. I also think it depends on like what you mean by autonomous. I feel like the sort of barrier to autonomous shifts all the time. I think like maybe just a year ago, one would have argued that what we have today is like fully autonomous agents, because they have this like iterative loop. But now that we're here, we're like, well, they need a lot of input and guidance and review. And maybe a year from now, the review won't be important anymore, just the input and sort of what to build. Like, I don't know. I find it really hard to kind of predict these things. I do think it will continue to change, but I don't know if fully autonomous is like achievable. I think it depends on your definition of autonomy.
Yeah, it depends. You're right. I don't know.
That's a good question.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yes, I mean, good. Yeah. I don't know. It's like autonomous for me is like they full do everything. We don't really need to actually check. We don't really need to test anything. This is what I had in my head. But yes,
I think that's like largely achievable. I mean, depends also on what you mean by not need to test, but like have sort of automated testing. So you don't need a human reviewer or sort of human eyes on everything. I think that's feasible. I don't think that's very far away. For certain code changes, I should say. There's, at Modal, there's a huge difference between making an update to the docs and like changing the wording on some docs page versus like making core changes to like how our scheduler works. Like those are like very, very different types of tasks. And obviously require different levels of human intervention.
It's true. But do you think we will get there?
Probably, but I'm like afraid to give a binary answer here.
No worries. Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much for your answer. Great. I mean, do you maybe want to share more like what's the like kind of next steps for this product, or maybe it's a secret? I don't know.
No, it's a secret. I mean, we're basically focused on sort of pushing the boundaries of what can be done. As I said, like this is a completely new product and new product space. I think nobody knows exactly where this is going to end up. We have sort of new use cases coming up all the time that are sort of gaining traction, and we're kind of doing our best to make sure that our product works really well for these new use cases. A big one we're seeing a lot of right now is reinforcement learning, which I think is super cool. I mean, I have an ML background, even though I haven't done ML in quite a few years at this point. Large companies basically use sandboxes when they want to train coding models. So you have an LLM, you want it to write code, and as part of the feedback loop, you need to execute that code somewhere so that you can generate the feedback. So that's one like significant use case for sandboxes, which is very different, I think, from sort of the lovable type use case, but it uses the same underlying primitive. So that's one that we think a lot about right now. I'm sure there will be new ones coming up. Like this is also one of those things where I'd rather sort of not try to predict.
No, exactly. But that is really exciting, to be honest. Exciting times to work on this project, actually.
For sure.
Nice. Now I want to go more into the community first.
I love talking about this.
I would love to hear more about women in data science as well. Like, what inspired you to actually create this community?
So basically what happened was I was at iSettle. I had sort of relatively recently started my career. I was trying to figure out, what does it even mean to be a data scientist? I had just sort of gotten the data scientist job title, and I was like so happy and proud that I finally had that job title. I was a real data scientist, and I was like, okay, where are all the other data scientists? And I went to a bunch of meetups. I sort of liked the idea of meetups and community, but there were like usually almost no women there. It would be like 10% women at most. And I sort of started wondering, like, where are all the women? And then I saw a post on LinkedIn where Galina, who I ended up later co-founding Women in Data Science with, she basically posted that she wanted to start a Women in Data Science chapter for Sweden or for Stockholm. Women in Data Science is a global organization, and then organizers can kind of sign up to host local events. So that's what we did. And she basically posted that she wanted to run a local event, and I randomly reached out to her. I didn't know her. It was like a total cold reach out. I was like, this would be cool. Like, I'd love to help out. And she also pulled in Sahar, who was the third co-founder. The two of them know each other from before, so I was like the odd one out. And we started pulling together this conference that we sort of thought would be a one-off. We were like debating, like, how many people can we find? Like, how many women in data science are there in Stockholm? And we got this venue that had like 100 seats, and it felt like a ridiculously large number. We were like, there can't be 100 women working in data science in Stockholm. Like, no way. But, we might as well get this venue. We got some sponsors, which is cool. Like, there were like, so iSettle, where I worked, wanted to sponsor, but several other companies sponsored us from day one. We got excited by that, someone else thought this was important. And then we like opened up for registration for the event, and we got so much interest. I think we had like those 100 seats, but I think we had another like 200 or 300 people on the wait list who wanted to come, and who we had to like tell no, which was like mind blowing to us that there was so much interest. And the conference itself was great. We ran it on March 14th, so it was Pie Day, and we had like little cakes with pie on them, which everyone enjoyed. As you think you can imagine, this was like a fairly mathy audience. And it was great. And basically, I think we all felt that it was awesome just to like see so many other women in a room and be like, we exist. Like, it's not just me. I'm not alone. Like, I think that was sort of the biggest benefit. And then we just kept doing this. So we ran annual conferences for many years. We started doing sort of meetups beyond the annual March conference every year. We eventually started a mentorship program. We ran a speaker database. We had a book club for a while that sort of expanded. We pulled in more people and had more organizers. And yeah, it was really cool. Looking back, it's also built such a big network. We had people who would like come back, who would like come to many of our events and like meet people. I know several people who like found jobs through us because they like met someone at an event. So it was really cool to just see it like take off. But we started completely for like selfish reasons. All we wanted was to like meet other women.
Fantastic, but it's also so inspiring, to be honest. Like, if you think about that, it started by an idea and then eventually grew out so much. I've actually been at your last year's event, and it was beautiful. Like the energy that you get is just amazing. Like so many women at one place. It's just crazy. Really beautiful.
Yeah, it's awesome. I mean, sadly though, we have always done this as sort of, we call it a labor of love. So it's always been the thing we do sort of outside of working hours. And what happened is basically when we started this, we were all sort of young and ambitious and had lots of time. And now we all have much less time. And so it's been very hard for us to kind of find time. And we sort of recently decided to sort of ramp it down and basically hope that others will start similar initiatives. But that's sort of where we ended up. But after, I think, 8 years. So it was a good run.
Yeah, I can absolutely understand. Like, beautiful, but amazing job, really. For you and to your team, really amazing job, I have to say.
It's been an awesome team to work with.
Nice. I wanted to ask you more about also, like, what do you feel like, what has, like, we also have running this community right now, Data AI Stockholm. We also try to promote more, like, even women in the field, but in general, we want to create this space where everyone is welcome and they can feel like they can learn from us. We can exchange even knowledge, like tackle challenges together, like, and grow in the field of data and AI. What is your opinion of the impact of these communities can have to people?
I mean, it's super important. I mean, I think super, super important. They sort of cannot be underestimated. As I said, like, I know lots of people who sort of found jobs through women in data science. And I mean, that's just like, that's a very like concrete thing as like an outcome, but I think a lot of it is sort of much less specific than that. You kind of meet someone who then introduces you to someone else, or kind of it plants this idea that maybe I could be doing this other thing or learning this thing over here, and like inspire. I mean, there's so much of it that's like also not tangible, but I think network is so important. One thing that's been recurring at Women in Data Science events is we've had a lot of people come who might not be working in data science, but they want to. So like that's a very, very common thing that has come up at almost all the events. And when we've had like panel discussions, like, how do I get into this field? Like, what do I do? And people are at like different levels of that journey. You know, some are like just starting to think about the idea and they're at the event because they want to like understand, what is this field? Like, what does it mean? What do I need to learn? Others are sort of already taking like a boot camp and they're wondering like, how do I land my first job? Like, what do I need to do? But I think for all of that, I think having a sort of support network is so important. Both like actually getting answers to these questions, getting advice on what to do, but also like finding someone who can help like open doors for you, make intros, recommend like whatever company might have job openings or whatever it could be. So yeah, I think community is incredibly important, regardless of gender. I think it's a sort of cool way to open doors for each other.
Thank you so much for sharing this.
Of course.
And now I will just go over the last question that we always ask to our members and our guests. What does responsible AI mean to you?
Oh, that's a great question.
It's more philosophical than technical.
It's such a big one, though. I don't know where to start. I mean, I've always felt like it's a huge problem that the people developing AI models aren't representative of people in general. And that applies in many dimensions. Gender is one of them, but definitely not the only one. There's so many sort of aspects of how most people working in AI are not like a representative sample of sort of the world's population. I think that in itself is a problem, because I think it's much easier to notice bias that you've been exposed to yourself or that you sort of have some awareness of. So I think that's a super important aspect of fairness, to sort of try to work towards having a more diverse set of people developing AI models. But I'm generally like super excited about sort of fairness and in AI. I've often felt like the academics of it are interesting, but what's even more interesting is like actual outcomes. There was like a thing, I don't remember when this was, maybe like 2 years ago or something, that showed that Försäkringskassan here in Sweden were using an algorithm that was sort of discriminating against, I think it was against women, but it was also against like other specific groups. I think stuff like that is terrifying and also much more interesting than figuring out sort of the optimal algorithms for measuring fairness, which like when I go to conference talks about fairness, they tend to focus on that. And that's obviously important. I'm not saying it's like irrelevant, but I feel like this topic is so much broader than just academics and like figuring out the perfect ways to measure. It's more, I think, about like figuring out as a society sort of what we want fairness to look like and like what we think is reasonable. And I think there's a huge gap here between sort of policymakers and technical people. And I think those two need to talk to each other more to kind of reach a reasonable middle ground.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. We should involve more people than not just maybe politicians, or not even like involve everyone to make it right.
Exactly.
Yeah,
I really agree.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
So happy for this interview. Really, you cannot imagine. Like, thank you. Thank you so much for coming, and thank you for being our guest.
Thank you. This was great. Thanks for having me.
And thank you everyone for watching. Hope to see you next time.